We're at the actual site where the empire of M.W. Savage existed, as far as the Dan Patch stables, the enclosed track, and the outdoor track, and the Savage Mansion back on the hill all existed. The amazing thing about all of this is that today, in 1989, there is not a stone standing of any of this vast facility. Joe, why don't you just give us a quick rundown on what we're looking at here as we pan through this scene?
Okay, Hugh. Actually, right behind us, looking north, was the rotunda of the Dan Patch stable, and the stables was 400 feet long, so the east wing went off in this direction 155 feet, and then there was one going off to the west there 155 feet, and it was attached to the 1/2 mile totally enclosed steam heated track. That's where they could train year round.
Now, the entire facility is only a short distance today from Highway 13. We can hear a lot of traffic noise going back in the background, but in those days, all you heard was probably the whistle of the engine of the Dan Patch line and occasionally a horse nickering in the distance, right?
Yes, that's correct, Hugh. And also the line, the railroad that's running just due south of us became known as the Chicago Northwestern. So you actually had two trains going through here, the Dan Patch to our west, and right south of us, the Chicago Northwestern.
Okay, and that Dan Patch line, of course, still exists today.
Yes, it is now known as the Sioux line.
All right, well, it's exciting to be here. We're at the actual site, and it's very exciting, Joe, to have you here to provide us with all this information and to see all of this wonderful footage. And now, in just a short time, we're going to be up at your homestead, where we're going to be looking over some fabulous Dan Patch historical material.
That will be fun.
Great. Well, Joe, here we are at the homestead that I've heard so much about. When was this all built?
This, Hugh, was built in 1906 by my father, George Egan.
And you were born and raised here?
Yes, sir. I was born here in 1924 and have spent most of my years here in this little homestead.
And this entire tract of land is basically as it was during the days of Dan Patch at the turn of the century?
The property we are standing on is, Hugh, and in fact, they used to bring Dan in here and give him spring water from our springs.
Probably right in this very spot.
I wouldn't doubt it a bit, Hugh. It could have been very close to this spot.
Okay, well, now we should tell you what we're standing by here. This is the training exercise sulky of the great Dan Patch. This is the real item, and it's part of Joe Egan's fabulous collection of Dan Patch historical items. Joe, why don't you tell us a little bit about this special sulky, because earlier in the video, we've mentioned that Dan Patch had crooked back legs, and this has some special construction that I think our viewers would like to hear about.
Yes, Hugh, Dan actually had a real bad left rear leg that he would throw out occasionally, so he had to have a wide rear sulky. The wheels had to be widened out, and these are actually about center to center, about 58 inches. And if you notice over on this left wheel, that is a wooden rim. And the reason for that was that Dan wouldn't get his leg all torn up when he got it caught in the wheel, which he'd do occasionally.
So the wood would just shatter no problem.
Just go kaput.
So you actually have a metal rim on one side and a wood rim on the other.
That is correct.
Interesting. Okay. Is there any other special features of this sulky that would be exclusive to Dan Patch other than the width of it?
Just the width and the wooden rim on the left side. And actually, this sulky here was on display at Savage, Minnesota during the Dan Patch days in 1954, and was shown as one of Dan Patch's training and exercise sulkies, and I wouldn't doubt they had come in here with it at one time.
Okay, well, tell me this. What would be the reason for Dan Patch and his driver to come all the way from the track a couple of miles away up to your homestead in this driveway?
Well, Hugh, that's a good question. But in those days, some of the trainers and grooms and drivers, they became wise early in the game, and they noticed the horses were becoming track sours.
A little bored with going around in the same circle all the time.
Their daily workouts. So what they do is bring them out in the country. All the roads out here at that time were gravel. Okay. And they bring them out and exercise them on the country roads.
All right, and when Dan was on this very spot in your driveway, where did the water come from, and who supplied him with the water? How did that all work? Did they let you know in advance that Dan was coming up, or how did
Well,
they handle it?
I wasn't alive at that time, but my older brothers, I'm sure, brought the water up from our spring, which is about 200 feet to our
Just to the
west of us here.
Okay.
And it still runs. It's a natural spring, puts out a stream about 1.5 feet wide and about 2 inches deep, never stops.
No kidding.
Yes.
So this was the place, and Dan Patch made frequent visits to this very spot.
Yes, sir, he did, Hugh, and he was driven by my cousin Mike Egan a good deal of the time because Mike was his last handler.
No kidding.
Yes, Mike took over after Mr. Charlie Plummer left the employ of Mr. Savage in 1910.
Fascinating history. Now, Joe, just over here we see the cutter, and of course I recognize that cutter from old black and white pictures that I've seen of M.W. Savage with Dan Patch hooked up to this cutter, and this is the original item?
This is the original item, Hugh, and that cutter was made special for Mr. Savage and for Dan to be hooked to in 1903. And Mr. Savage used to drive his friends around in Minneapolis, around 26 in Portland. Mm-hmm. And also Mr. Savage's son, Harold, used to drive his little friends around when he was only 10, 11 years old with Dan hitched to that, delivering Christmas presents. I have a picture of that.
I've heard those stories. The fastest pacing harness horse in the world, and so well-tempered, you could hook him up behind a sleigh and a 10-year-old boy
He was
could
very
ride.
docile, yes. And Dan, I believe, loved it. He loved the attention.
I'm
Yes.
sure he did. Well, Joe, in just a little bit, we're going to be looking at a few more of your valuable historical items that are connected with the M.W. Savage Empire and, of course, with the great Dan Patch. So we'll check in with you here in just a minute or so and see what we have there.
Well, thank you, Hugh.
Okay.